Hey everybody, welcome to the videos for my core plays for week 10 of the NFL season over on DraftKings. Going over some of my favorite cash and tournament plays on the entire slate. I'll also talk a little bit about prize picks as well, going over some of my favorite props on the weekend if you do want to check that out. But if you find this video helpful in any way possible, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to take that one step further, kind of fish number over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. NFL and NBA currently going on, so we got the optimizer, ownership projections, cheat sheets, data sheets, all that fun stuff for all sports that are currently on. Then MLB and NASCAR when those seasons start back up again. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests or salary cap restrictions or anything like that, just you versus the props they offer each and every single day. And they do offer some pretty soft lines, I feel, each and every single weekend. So I'd recommend taking advantage of that. You can use code CPEN if you're new signing over there to get a free money bonus in spots match up to $100, so it's free money when I use it to your advantage. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And starting us off with cash game core play number 1, it's the obvious. Not only am I projecting him to be the highest owned running back on the entire slate, but the highest owned player as well, but it's Dearness Johnson, RB1 for the Cleveland Browns out of necessity this weekend, and he's only $4,700. Like, just to mention the guys that are out for the Browns this weekend, no Nick Chubb, no Kareem Hunt, no Joshua Kelly, no Demetric Felton. I think the only guys he's going to compete with touches for that could get elevated off the practice squad is guys like Brian Hill and Dexter Williams. So yeah, we're probably going to see 20 plus touches here out of Dearness Johnson. And we saw in week 7 versus the Denver Broncos, and this is with Felton playing. Felton's not really a running back, more of a gadget running back that plays a lot in the slot. But he saw 22 carries in that game and 2 targets, had over 140 rushing yards, around 30 DraftKings points. Not saying he's going to replicate that, but I mean, 20 plus touches is pretty much a lock for Dearness Johnson in this game because the Browns love to run the football. Like, that's their game plan. If they can't run the ball, usually bad things happen, so they're going to try to run. And the Patriots, it's not like they had been locked down versus the run so far this season. They're 17th DVOA and 18th versus running backs. So I think Dearness Johnson should be fine. He's running behind a fantastic offensive line, one of the best in the entire league. And 2 of those guys are going to be blocking quite happy this weekend since they just got paid the big bucks, Wyatt Teller and Joel Bitonio. So at $4,700, he's a very tough fade this week. I'd rather get different elsewhere because besides Mark Ingram, there's no really great value running backs this weekend. And Dearness Johnson definitely projects as the best. I currently have him projected to be like the RB9, RB10 on the week, or I guess I should say for this slate. But definitely by far the highest pump per dollar running back. I have him around 17, 18 points, which is a 3.8x value. The next best guy is like around 3. So loving Johnson, he's going to pop up a lot in optimizers, pops up a lot in mine, and in cash games, he is going to be super high owned. If you bust, it won't matter just because of his ownership. And I do want to mention his prize picks prop is sitting at 74.5 yards, which I would not be surprised if he hits the over on that as long as this game stays close, which should. I really can't see either team blowing each other out. And moving on to our second cash game core play, I'm a little bit on the fence with AMARI Cooper, but I'm just really having a hard time passing up his price point at $6,200. Like, how does he not hit value? Like, I'm not saying he's going to come out here and score 30 plus points, but I think he can score his 15 to 20, which is just fine in cash games at $6,200. Another reason I really like AMARI Cooper is because I'm playing Dak Prescott in cash games this weekend. More than likely, I've not locked anything in yet, but more than likely Dak Prescott is going to move my cash game QB below $7,000. And the Cowboys should put up a lot of points here. This game features a 55-point over-under, which is currently highest in the entire slate. They have a 32-point implied team total, so points are going to be scored from somebody. Now, it could always be Ezekiel Elliott, Dalton Schultz, or CeeDee Lamb, but AMARI Cooper should have enough production at this price point to pay off. I currently have him projected around 18-some fantasy points, which is like 3x over on DraftKings, which is just fine by me. He's one of the better point per dollar wide receivers on the entire slate. At least that's what I have it projected. And this is a good matchup versus Atlanta. Now, A.J. Terrell, he is a solid corner, which he should see some coverage from him. But, I mean, overall, their defense is not that great versus the pass. They ranked 28th DVA versus the pass so far this season. And versus wide receivers, they're kind of mid-pack, 15th in points per game. But really, I'm just trying to get exposure to the super high implied team total. And if you're using Dak Prescott, he's not really a running quarterback these days, so you're going to want to pair him with somebody. AMARI Cooper comes in at a very nice price point. And moving on to our third cash game core play, we have Najee Harris, $7,900. The problem is, this weekend, I think you can make a case for either Jonathan Taylor, Dalvin Cook, or Najee Harris here, but I'm leaning on Najee Harris the most. He's currently my highest projected running back on the entire slate and currently my second highest owned projected running back, as well, only behind the cheap free play in Dearness Johnson this weekend. Although it is close between some guys, but Najee Harris I think is the guy that will probably pick up the most ownership. One, because he's below $8,000, so that 7 beside his name looks a lot better. And he's facing Detroit, and Detroit sucks defensively. They suck versus the run. I mean, I really have a hard time seeing Najee Harris bust here. Besides week 1, he's had a very high floor so far this season. think his worst game of the year besides that week 1 game versus the Bills was last week versus the Bears, right around 16 fantasy points. But that's an amazing floor. We know his ceiling is pretty high as well. One thing I am a little bit concerned about is because I'm imagining the Steelers are not going to be trailing this game, so I'm not sure exactly how many dump-offs Najee Harris is going to get. But still, he's always involved in the passing game. He's only had 3 catches the past 2 weeks, though, which does concern me. But we know he's always going to be involved in the passing game. Has nearly a 20% target share in the season, currently sitting at 17.5%. But close to 20 rushing attempts per game, 6.5 targets. Detroit is currently allowing the second most points per game and 25th DVA versus the run, allowing over 110 rushing yards, over a rushing touchdown, nearly a receiving touchdown per game, specifically to running backs as well. So Najee Harris would be very surprised if he does not find the end zone in this game. They're 8.5-point favorites, playing at home versus a very bad defense. I just have a really hard time seeing Najee Harris bust. This next one is more of a cash game tournament hybrid here because I think DeOntay Johnson is going to be very chalky on this slate. But I already have a Steeler listed here, so I'm not sure if I want to double up on the Steelers in my cash game lineup, although I would have no problem with it because I think DeOntay Johnson is one of the absolute smash spots in the entire slate. So we'll call more of a hybrid here. I think you can definitely play him in cash games or tournaments this weekend. But how does he bust here versus the Lions? No Chase Claypool this weekend, so it's basically going to be the Najee Harris and DeOntay Johnson. So yes, Muth is going to be involved, but I just have a hard time seeing Johnson below $7,000, ending up with a snowflake beside his name on your DraftKings lineups this weekend. Like, he's facing Detroit. They're allowing the most yards per attempt so far this season. I know Big Ben, the guy throwing in the football, is completely washed at this point, but the volume he sees every single week is really hard to ignore. 10 targets per game, close to a 30% target share, about 6.5 catches, 0.29 targets per route range so far this season, which is fantastic. And the Lions are currently 29th DVA versus the pass, despite being kind of mid-pack versus wide receivers in terms of fantasy points allowed per game. But Deontay Johnson with no Chase Claypool, going to get peppered with targets. You see 10-plus targets in this game. And, I mean, the guy's a very talented wide receiver, and I have him projected as one of the best wide receivers in the entire slate. He's not priced like it. I do want to mention, one thing I really like about Deontay Johnson this weekend over on Price Picks is that his fantasy point prop is sitting at 15 points. He's gone over that in 5 out of 7 games he's played so far this year, and the one game he missed, he was like 0.4 fantasy points off. So I really like taking the over on that. That's one of my favorite bets in the entire weekend, as he should have really no problem hitting that. And moving on to GPP core play number 2, we have Dalvin Cook, RB1 for the Minnesota Vikings, in a smash spot versus the LA Chargers, who have been a run funnel defense so far this season, as they currently rank dead last, 32nd DVA versus the run, 26 versus running backs, allowing nearly 30 DraftKings points per game, around 130 rushing yards, nearly 1.5 rushing touchdowns, and Dalvin Cook is the guy that's going to see 20-plus touches in this matchup. And I love this game for DFS purposes. There's a lot of good plays in this game besides Dalvin Cook. But we have a 53.5 point over-under, 25-point implied team total for Dalvin Cook. They're on the road in LA. 3.5 point spread, so it should be pretty back and forth. The Chargers and the Vikings both played actually a pretty decent pace, so I am loving Dalvin Cook. And the reason he's a tournament play for me, I think you can play him in cash games. He will have some ownership this weekend. But I do think Jonathan Taylor and Najee Harris will have some higher ownership. There's also other guys like Austin Eckler and Ezekiel Elliott that will carry some ownership as well, kind of taken away from Dalvin Cook. Plus, he's had off the field issues, which people might stay away from him just because of that, but that's not going to affect him this weekend. So Dalvin Cook, love the spot versus the Chargers. His prop over on Price Picks is currently sitting at 89.5 yards. DK has him in the 90s, so I like taking the over on that. I mean, the Chargers have just been getting annihilated on the ground so far this season. Now they're facing one of the best running backs in football. Definitely like hitting the overs on Dalvin Cook and being overweight on him in tournaments this weekend. Moving on to our third and final GPP core play of the week. This could turn into a cash game core play depending on Chris Godwin's status, but if he happens to be in, that would not mean I'm shying away from Tyler Johnson. I still think he's a solid play because we could see Chris Godwin limited in a way. But back in week 8, when all these guys played, except Antonio Brown, Tyler Johnson did play over 60% of the snaps, had 6 targets, 5 catches, 65 yards, good for 11.5 DraftKings points. He's on the field, and the guy was the unquestioned wide receiver 3 in that offense. But if Chris Godwin happens to be out looking like a game-time decision, no Antonio Brown, no Rob Gronkowski, the defense is going to completely blanket Mike Evans. Not saying Mike Evans isn't a good play, but the attention is definitely going to be over there. And Tyler Johnson's going to have some free space here. He'll kind of slide right into that Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown role, and look, he should play the majority of the snaps. He is dirt cheap at $3,300. Tom Brady is probably going to get his 300-plus passing yards and multiple passing touchdowns, so the ball has to go somewhere. And Tyler Johnson, I mean, he is dirt cheap, and he really makes some things work. Like, if you roster Tyler Johnson this weekend, you can quite easily fit in like a Dalvin Cook with the Najee Harris and still get some other really good pass-catching options, spend up a little bit at quarterback. So Tyler Johnson would be a free square if Chris Godwin happens to be out, but if Chris Godwin's in, I still like playing Tyler Johnson. He'll just be lower owned, which would make him a good tournament play. but he could shift towards a cash game play. But this is a fantastic spot for the passing attack for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They've just been so bad defensively this season, the Washington football team that is, versus the pass. I mean, 31st DVOA, 43.8 DraftKings points allowed per game, specifically to wide receivers, allowing the second most points per game, nearly 200 receiving yards, and nearly 1.5 receiving touchdowns per game, specifically to wide receivers. So Tyler Johnson, potentially going to be one of the best values on the entire slate. I currently have him projected for around 10.5 points with Chris Godwin being in, maybe somewhat limited to a degree. And if he happens to be out, I could see that getting pushed up to around 13, 14 points, which would clearly put him as the best point per dollar wide receiver on the entire slate. And before we close this out, I do want to mention I really like Dan Arnold over 8.5 fantasy points over on Prize Picks. He has like a 35-40% target share ever since joining the Jaguars, and the Colts are one of the worst teams in the league versus tight ends so far this season. Top 5 in points allowed per game, allowing over 60 receiving yards and a lot of touchdowns as well. So be on the lookout for that prop in addition to the other ones that I talked about. But with that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So I hope it was helpful. And if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, kind of official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. Spreadsheets, optimizers, ownership projections, not just for the NFL, but the NBA as well. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you need to sign over there, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. I think that'll be it. I'll stop rambling. I wish you guys the best of luck on Sunday and enjoy the rest of your weekend.